The Burlington Public Library is always a flurry of activity. Among these activities are talks presented by visiting authors. I caught up with one of these visiting authors, Charlotte Gordon, writer of The Romantic Outlaws, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Mary Shelley. Ms. Gordon had fought both traffic and a cold given to her by her students at Endicott to be at the Burlington Public Library, and those in attendance appreciated her efforts. After her presentation and book signing, I caught up with the author.
I think ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I started life as a poet. And my first two books actually are books of poetry. And then I fell in love with a poet who happened to be dead. Her name was Anne Bradstreet, and I tried to find out everything I could about her, but the biographies that had been written of Bradstreet were pretty dated, and although they were useful and interesting, I realized I was going to have to write my own if I wanted to know anything about Anne Bradstreet. And I loved the process of research, but also crafting a story out of history. I really loved it. So my first book was the story of Anne Bradstreet, and it was a wonderful experience.
Wanting something done right and doing it oneself seemed to be a theme in our discussion, as Miss Gordon said how she came about writing the double biography of the two Marys.
The book that I've just written is the story of Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, and who was the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. I think I'd always known about both Wollstonecraft and Shelley, but I had somehow not realized that they were mother and daughter. So when I found out they were mother and daughter, my curiosity was really piqued. And then I went on a kind of pilgrimage to find out more about both of them. Then again, I looked for the biography that would tell the story of mother and daughter, and it didn't exist. So I ended up realizing I was going to have to write it myself. I wanted to tell the story of both mom and daughter.
With her first subject living at the end of the 18th century and the second living at the beginning of the 19th, Gordon shared some of the difficulties that come about when writing about people and their lives in the past.
Well, of course, you can't control the sources. Then you can't go back in time and say, Mary, please tell me what really happened. Their Victorian descendants, Mary Shelley's daughter-in-law, burned a lot of letters. And so there's big gaps, and it's really frustrating for the historian. Mary Shelley in particular lived such a scandalous life that I think the Victorians couldn't handle it and really tried to get rid of the evidence of, for example, the fact that Mary Shelley ran away with Percy when he was married to another woman when she was only 16 and he was 20. I mean, it was just too much. So they tried to get rid of all of the evidence. They didn't succeed, thankfully. So we still have journals, we still have letters, the ones they didn't get hold of. But
Miss Gordon also shared what these women have to offer us here in the 21st century.
I think what I find so inspirational about them is how brave they were. If there was a rule, they broke it. And the rules of the time period for women were so unfair. And somehow they had the courage and the creativity and the originality to move forward and write what they believed and say what they believed, even though they suffered tremendously for it. So I think they're really inspirational for both men and women of the 21st century who want to live creative lives, ethical lives, and who are brave enough to go against the tide.
Before heading out, the author shared some of her closing thoughts.
I loved coming to the Burlington Library. It was really fun to have a crowd out tonight in the middle of February. But I think that, what would I like to share? That I think history can still speak to us today, and that these women still have so much to teach us and can be such inspirations, and also, I think kind of great companions, especially during cold New England winters. Sometimes it's great to have a really good book and have some really great characters that you can get to know. So I hope that people will read Romantic Outlaws and love the Marys as much as I did.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Lori. And thank you to the library staff from the Burlington Public Library, talking to an author about authors. This is Corey McNeil for BNEWS Weekly. Back to you in the studio.